I wasn't going to tell you a joke this morning, but I've been asked to do so, so I will tell you one funny story to start with. I heard Billy Graham share this story, the American evangelist. It was of a young preacher preaching his first sermon in his home church, and he'd grown up in a church where, wrongly I think, the impression given was that you don't need to have any notes if you're preaching. The Holy Spirit just tells you what to say when you're speaking, so you just get up and speak. So he got up in front of the congregation. It was a large church, and he gave his text for the morning, which was, "Behold, I come unto you." But then his mind went completely blank. He panicked as he saw all these faces, like myself before you this morning, and he couldn't remember what he was going to speak on. So he thought to give himself a moment to reflect, he would repeat the text. So he said a second time, my text for the morning is, "Behold, I come unto you." Still, his mind was empty. He must have known of Welsh preachers, because in Wales we say, if you don't have much to say, you just shout it louder and hope for the best. So he hung over the pulpit. He was a bigger guy than myself, and it was a pulpit like this. And he shouted out on top of his voice, "My text for the day is, Behold, I come unto you." At which point the pulpit collapsed under his weight, and he fell into the lap of a lady sitting just where Marika is there. She was an older woman, though, in her 70s, with beautiful blue eyes. And as he looked up at her eyes, he said to her, "I'm terribly sorry about this." She said, "You don't have to apologize. You told me 3 times you were coming." Behold, I've come unto you. That's not the text for this morning. Now, I love the way the worship and music group has led us in different styles of music and worship. And I love that haunting rendition this morning of when the saints go marching in. I don't know if you can flash up the first verse, the folks in charge of the technology there. I can't remember the words, but it was something along the lines of, many people have gone before us, and we follow on in their footsteps and follow their example. So this morning, as I speak on the theme of shining, I'm going to use illustrations more than other days from all around the world, and I'm going to move quickly. I want to try to touch on every continent, mostly of people I've met who are shining for Christ as examples. There we are. We're all traveling in the footsteps of those that have gone before. We'll all be reunited on that new and sunlit shore. Because of the theme, actually, I'm moving from Colossians this morning to look at a very simple passage you all know well in Matthew chapter 5. And I'll read those 3 or 4 verses now. It's very easy to follow. It's the theme of salt and light when Jesus was speaking. And he says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." Now, some people have said they've enjoyed the quotations the last 2 days. So here's another one for you from the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. "He who wants an easy life was born in the wrong generation." Well, that was written over 100 years ago. But I think in an increasingly complex and chaotic world, and in a medical and dentistry context, where new technologies are raising more and more ethical challenges and issues, it certainly applies to your generation, the coming generation. I've talked to several people this week who face doubts, and there are maybe many reasons why they have doubts. One may be because they haven't developed an adequate theology of suffering. And if particularly you're a medic, you really need to work on this, because it's very difficult to function as a light if you're consumed by doubts and uncertainty. Because as we heard yesterday, one of the keys to living a fruitful life is you need to get your convictions, your foundational convictions clear which shape character, and it's the use of the competencies in the light of convictions and character that leads to a fruitful existence. So one of the keys in life is to shape character early on and to form your convictions about key issues very early on in life. Therefore, don't run away from doubts, but face up to them and get help, particularly here if you're struggling with the issue of suffering. I'd have been happy to speak on that theme from a theological perspective, but it may be good for younger doctors and dentists to talk with those who are older here, who have grappled with it. Let me give an illustration from Peru, how this worked out. I met some friends from Peru just a few mornings ago. I told them I would tell one story from Peru, so here it is. In the early 1990s, I traveled to Peru, and it was a very dangerous country at the time. There was a guerrilla movement called Sendero Luminoso, Shining Path, and they targeted evangelical Christians. They killed at least 300 pastors in a 12-year period in the 80s and early 90s. Most of them Pentecostals, many women also. They targeted them because they were a Maoist group, and they wanted, as people went to these pastors and churches for help, for hope in adversity, to destroy the testimony of the churches so that people would come to them. Anyway, at the time I visited, it was very dangerous. We went to a camp high up in the Andes, and in a place near Ayacucho, and it was a conference center which hadn't been used for over a year. It was a dangerous time. It was the time of elections in the local village. The mayor was kidnapped and was shot dead on his doorstep that week. While I was there, 2 local pastors were kidnapped, and it was a very dangerous place to be. So I said to the students, well, if it's so dangerous, what are we doing here? They said, well, we got a good deal. It was only $1 a day. I said, I'd rather go somewhere else which costs more. And then, as I was reflecting on this, our only daughter had died not too long before. And so I was praying in my room, please, Lord, don't take my life. It'll be very difficult for my wife and son, having lost a daughter, if I am taken also. So I pray you'll spare me a little longer. Then I came across a young Peruvian woman called Amelia. She was 22. She was a sociology student, and she said to me, Lindsay, what do you think of studying sociology? She was in the local university. I said, it's a good subject. Why do you ask? She said, well, that's what I'm studying. And she said, most of the guys in the sociology faculty are members of the guerrilla movement, Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso. When I became a Christian 3 years ago, they put a list up on the student union notice board of the people they were going to kill. And as they killed them, they ticked them off one by one. She said all the Christian brothers know them, so they went to see them and said, stop killing the people. And they said, keep quiet or we'll kill you too. She said I was a new Christian, but I was frightened of the cost of speaking and shining for Christ. So I said nothing for 2.5 years. Then she said, 2.5 years after I came to faith, just about a year ago, I decided to confront my questions. And the question I asked myself was, is the Christian faith true? I dare not ask the question, does the Christian faith make me feel good? Because I knew that wasn't enough to help me stand firm and to speak out. I had to have an answer to the question, is it defensible? Are there evidences for the truth claims of the Christian faith? So she said, after a period of confronting the questions of 6 months, I came to the settled conviction the gospel was true, Christ was unique, and counting the cost, in recent days, I've spoken openly of Christ. Now, the lesson from that is convictions are foundational in terms of shining for Christ. I always remember when I was in my early 20s how one older Christian said to me, what you need, Lindsay, is to keep up your reading. Don't stop reading. Find an older person you can discuss what you're reading with regularly. I find it much easier to read articles often than whole books. But one of the challenges, I suppose, in your work is the danger of stopping reading. You need to read especially good apologetic material which provide answers to the big questions in life, to be equipped and to have solid convictions. Having said that, by way of introduction, let's look at this passage. And I'd like to suggest 4 things Jesus meant when he talks about salt and light. What did he mean? I think the first thing that he meant is that Christians are radically different from non-Christians. Note the contrast here between the world and you, between darkness and light, between decay and salt. The two communities are placed one alongside each other. And in this sense, God has called us to be distinctive and to shine, not just dimly, but brightly. Let me give an illustration. Not all the illustrations will come from the medical world, of someone I met in Jordan in the late 1990s. Not all of you are old enough to remember the invasion of Kuwait in 1991 by Iraq under Saddam Hussein. This was before the second Iraq war. They called it the first Iraq war. Western powers entered in and drove the Iraqi soldiers back. And as a consequence, there was chaos in Iraq, as there is today. And many Iraqis crossed the border into Jordan because King Hussein, the king of Jordan at the time, said the Iraqi neighbors are our friends, even our brothers. So no visas were required. They allowed them to cross the border. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Iraqis entered into Jordan. Most of them were Muslims, not all. The Jordanian government set up camps to look after people, but there were too many people to care for. So the crown prince, the brother of the king, went to see the leader of the evangelical church in Jordan and said to him, I know that you're a small minority, you Christians, but we are overwhelmed by all the refugees coming from Iraq. We don't know what to do to look after them. Most of them are Muslims. We know you are Christians, but please, would you help us? Would you open up your churches to have people sleep there? And would you allow Muslim Iraqis to come and live with you till we can find a way forward? So all the churches in Amman opened themselves up to receive Muslim Iraqis. And this friend who was telling me this said he welcomed in a family of a husband and a wife with 3 children. And after 6 months, the husband in the family said to my Jordanian friend, my family has been with you for 6 months. You know we are Muslims. We know you are Christians. You've never said anything about your faith. Why are you being so kind to us? And he said, I just want to show to you something of the love of Christ which has been shown to me. And it melted the man's heart. The whole family became believers. Today there may be more Iraqi believers in Jordan than there are Jordanian-born believers. And afterwards, Crown Prince Hassan, who's still alive, wrote a book about the history of Jordan. And in it, as a Muslim, he made this amazing statement. He said, the Christians in Jordan are less than 1% of the total population, but, quote, they are the glue which holds our culture together. You see what a minority can do? If believers demonstrate that they are radically different in reaching out, in this case, to Muslims. On another occasion, in the early 1950s, before I was born, the student movement in China was very large. And when the communists took over for 2 years, they allowed Christian student groups to continue to function. But they sent spies to all the groups. Everybody knew who the spies were. There was a student group in Shanghai with 200 students, so they told me. And the Communist Party sent one spy to watch them for a whole year. After a year, the spy became a Christian. And somebody said to him, what provoked you to become a Christian after being with us for a whole year? And he said, oh, that's easy. You all knew I was a spy, but you loved me too much. I could not resist it. Similarly, in Portugal, at a conference over Easter several years ago, I met with 5 Chinese students who had been helped by some Portuguese students. They'd been in the country for 6 months. We were giving them Gospels and New Testaments. And as I presented the New Testaments to them, I said to them, now you've never read the New Testament. You've been in the country for 6 months. Just on the basis of what you've seen in the lives of the